We are going to talk about building and budgeting for teams. Somebody posted on LinkedIn that they saw a advertisement for Chief of Staff and Agents as the title. And so now that your team is not necessarily entirely human, I think it changes. Well, it might change the calculus a little bit, but we'll find out from our. Why don't we just go down the road? So I'm going to start us off just with a quick intro and your sort of focus and interest areas.
Yes, Tom Wisniewski. I invest out of RosePaul Ventures, which is my family office. Prior to this, I launched and helped run a VC called NPV. In addition, I'm also an investor in a number of VC funds, including Charlie's funds from the past and many others. I focus on seed stage B2B software.
Hi, everyone. Tessa Battistin. I spent 5.5 years on the fund side. Prior to moving into tech, I was at Shopify. Now I'm at Justworks, working on their investor partnerships program and Justworks for Founders program.
Hey everyone, I'm Erik Norlander, general partner at Google Ventures. I lead our New York practice and invest across the enterprise and the frontier. Obviously, we're Google's VC, but we're non-strategic. We can invest in things that are good for Google, bad for Google, have nothing to do with Google. And we do everything from seed to growth and cover areas as varied as biotech, clean energy, lots of software, lots of AI, lots of infrastructure. And I tend to focus on the earlier stage, so seed A.
Hey everyone, I'm Jack Arenas, an investor at Founder Collective. We are a pre-seed and seed fund. And prior to this, spent the last 10 years as a founder, so very new to venture. I've done consumer and B2B as a founder and was always CTO and running big teams of engineers, product managers, and designers.
So, John, we'll stick with you along those lines. I'm thinking about building my team budget and the parts of the company that I'm actually going to hire humans to do versus ways in which I'm likely to automate. How should founders even think about building those plans out now in this stage? How is team composition changing at this stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think you still absolutely need people. I think it's a bit of a false dichotomy. I think ideally you bring on people to the team who have been keeping up and getting good at using agents and automating their work. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you still need someone responsible for the end work. I focus on very early stage. So we like when companies keep burn lower than 100K, ideally definitely lower than 200K per month. And we've seen companies be able to grow very, very quickly with small teams. Haven't seen anyone do chief of staff and agents yet, but certainly very small growth teams, maybe working with an AI agent SaaS business, being able to actually handle quite a bit, where maybe 5 or 10 years ago, you'd need a team of 3 or 4.
So, Erik, on the larger side, are you seeing the team composition projections change significantly, or is it still higher and awesome? It's kind of funny to think about VC. We'd say, software businesses, really, really high margins, and then it takes $500 billion to get raised before it IPO, but somehow you just wind up spending more.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the math is changing. I mean, maybe it still takes a lot of money, but some of that money is going to go to, foundation models rather than, humans. I mean, I'm seeing it in my own portfolio. I have a company that's kind of between A and B, just crossed 20 million ARR. They have 4 engineers. And I'm like, guys, let's hire number 5. They're like, yeah, we'll think about it. So it's real. I mean, the things that you can do. And I think, look, for this group, in some ways, the bigger companies are jealous of you, right? Because you can have an AI marketing department, AI customer service department, a very advanced, AI engineering org. For bigger companies, that would start with a layoff, right? So that's not a great vibe, to put it mildly. And so I think being at the early stage in this era is actually a real advantage, because you can basically try it out with AI. And then when you hit a limit, which ultimately you will, you can figure out, hey, what are the right people to bring in?
When you're actually telling them to go hire that 5th person, is that a function of do you think there's stuff they're missing out on by not taking that hire?
I mean, it's funny that I'm the one saying, I think that's the joke, right? It's I'm you should probably hire more people, right? We're going to hit some scaling challenges, and they obviously know more about this than I do. So they're not feeling it. They have money to, but it's not a money or resource problem. And I think ultimately, yes, the fifth engineer will get hired. It's just interesting because, normally that would have happened, even like 5 years ago, that would have happened 2 years ago or something like that. And it would have been a natural evolution. And now, again, things are accelerating so quickly and you can do so much more that, the founders of the company aren't feeling the pain, right? That you would have felt where it's like, I can't get anything done. Like, we just need to hire, like we're blocked. That feeling seems to have gone away, at least for the moment. They may hit some other inflection where that's no longer the case.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd be curious, like what you guys are saying. For a few of my companies that have raised A's or really big seeds where we did the pre-seed, many of them have spent very little of that capital. And it's not engineering that's the rate limiting factor. Like it used to be kind of product design engineering. You need to hire to build the product for people to buy. But really the rate limiting factor today seems to be go to market, hiring the salespeople, hiring AEs, someone to lead commercial, maybe a CRO, and they just can't bring those people on fast enough, which is just really interesting to me.
I think there is a senior talent and knowledge, right? Like you can have a bunch of money in the bank and you can say, oh, sure, we'll spend that on marketing. But if you don't have a senior hire who can actually outline how to spend that money effectively, they're just going to blow. So there's knowledge on how to spend large amounts of money well. And I think early stage startups are not great at bringing on senior hires.
Yeah. And maybe that's the point. It sort of changed the math. Like I think people still think you need to raise certain amounts per round. And I don't know if that really holds true anymore.
So Tessa and Tom, I'll hand this question over to you. At the seed stage, first of all, like the companies you're out talking to, how many of them actually have like real headcount plans versus or being opportunistic?
Yeah, I don't want that. Do it.
I would say I mostly see, when I'm chatting with founders and chatting with their investors, I mostly see headcount being tied to milestones today rather than necessarily being tied to like some arbitrary, our team should be X size by this time. So when you're thinking about like in 6 months, when I write that next investor update, what milestones do I need to, or KPIs do I need to hit? And are the team headcounts that I have planned helping me get to that KPI? Yes or no? So I see that more and more because we see so much use of fractional for back office or other levels of support, AI agents, where those key hires are really important for your next fundraising conversation and like your next customer conversation as well.
Yeah, I would say certainly the numbers have dropped, especially in dev, but I would still say, if you're starting out with just a couple of, developers in your team or a founder who's doing a lot of the dev, you do need to add people. You hopefully are adding people that are AI enabled and you do a good job. So I still see that happening. I would just not expect those teams to get as large. I would say on the sales and go-to-market side, absolutely. A lot of investments I've made are into more old line industries that haven't been penetrated by a lot of software, and they still require humans to be involved in the selling of it. And so you're going to build some kind of an enterprise sales force. It'll be AI enabled. Perhaps there won't be as many junior people doing the grunt work of driving top of funnel. We've seen a lot of action there where AI tools have grown, but still, when you're going from pre-seed to seed to Series A, there is a build out that needs to happen. But I like the thought that you brought up, that perhaps it's bringing in more senior people at that stage who can then have the ability to manage the funds and maybe manage without additional hiring beyond that.
So, Erik and Jack, I'll pose this question to you. That there's sort of a tension between like staying lean, not over hiring, creating flexibility, but also like building the team that gets you to a Series A because you need to achieve certain goals and somebody needs to do that. Is there sort of a right size team or like a completeness of team that you think is like associated with a Series A?
I mean, I definitely don't think from an investor perspective, you should be too prescriptive about, what is the right size team, especially now because so many things can be automated. And, to your point about if I have to do a really heavy lift in enterprise sales, I might just need a ton of people to go out and do that. There might just be no way to automate it. But then I might be really light on dev, or maybe I'm doing some really deep AI thing and I need a bunch of researchers and there's no AI to build AI. So, when I'm looking at a company coming in for an A or really whatever round, you're just kind of trying to make sense of the team, not to say, oh, it's too big, it's too small. I would agree that until you're getting signals from the market that things are going well, it's good to stay lean. I mean, that advice makes sense today, and it will continue to make sense. And also, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, I would at least try with AI before you go out and hire a bunch of people. That's the best part. A lot of the execution you can do now with AI, so you might as well try that before you immediately resort to hiring.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree on try with AI first before hiring. Ultimately, you still need someone who knows the space, whether it's within engineering or go to market. A few of the companies in my portfolio that have raised A's in the last year, most of them are like less than 10 people. I almost think it's like a point of pride to be super capital efficient and get to 5 million of revenue with like a 6-person team. But ultimately, you should only hire as much as you need in order to block the rate limiting factors of the business. And those rate limiting factors could be go to market, could be build, could be a bunch of different things. And it's not necessarily people these days. I think people are just trying to speed through getting as many customers and as much revenue as possible. And one more SDR or engineer or product manager is typically not the answer.
Do you think for the VCs, even if there are things that an agent can do, that there's a de-risking factor, that there's a person that they can talk to and like, oh, who's going to lead your marketing? Oh, it's this black box, and I built a bunch of agents for it, versus like, this is so-and-so who led marketing in the early days for data.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the very important things, and I'll answer that in a second, is that especially for founders who don't really come from a super commercial background, I think certainly by the A, you at least want to have someone there who maybe is incredibly experienced, has been in the space for a very long time, and lends some credibility to the team, at least being able to attract amazing talent. I think no matter what, you still need, for everyone that you bring on the team, they just need to be 99th percentile. And sorry, the question was specifically on.
It's like the credibility of a person. I mean, like credibility is sort of key word that you said there. It's like buying work versus buying credibility.
I think it's both though. I think like if I was doing a third company right now, I would probably, each individual can only prompt Claude so much and can only use Claude Code so much. Even if you have 15 tabs open on your terminal, still needs people to figure out like what's worth doing and what's worth focusing on. So you still need an orchestrator. And if I was running an organization, I'd probably have someone who's just like really AI enabled on marketing, really AI enabled on sales, on product and engineering, really like in every place. That just levels up the individual CEO and founders if you're able to do that well. So I think you still need people.
So Tessa, I'm going to pose this question to you and to Tom as well. One of the ways that we're sort of arbitraging talent here is through AI, but another way is hiring globally and also getting some offshore people. I mean, even like Canadian engineers are cheaper than they are here, right? How do you do this well at this seed stage? And what are some of the things I know Justworks has tools to enable you to make it easier to hire talent? What do you see people doing in this area?
Yeah, this is a super hot area for us right now. We see it with almost every single early stage founder that I speak with. I would say the main two areas were EOR, which is employer of record, where you pay fee every month to essentially have Justworks or another provider take on the majority of the risk associated with keeping that person employed, compliant, and taxable, I guess, in the country where they live. And the two main kind of points around this are avoiding an extraordinarily high H-1B price, which we're now all living in here in the US. It's obviously much cheaper to keep that person local. And B, it's an amazing way to just dip your toe in the water in a new market. We don't see people using EOR as their end-all answer to building out a team internationally. If you choose to do that, it ultimately takes like 12 months, lots of money. You have to incorporate abroad, all that stuff. It's an excellent way to test a market and see, hey, if I distributed my team in this certain way, are we able to go to market in a creative way abroad, A, or B, can I keep like my excellent engineering talent in Central or South America, in Canada, in Europe? EOR is like very, very cost-effective way to test this. It's also a cost-effective way to keep great talent on your team if you're not willing to like lawyer up and deal with the H-1B nightmare that we're all living in.
I'm going to ask you for a little honesty about that, because if I come in and say, here's my team, me and this person here in New York, and then like 30 people in Argentina and 20 people over here. Does it make it more complex, or is it perceived as more risky from the investor side, even if it's cost efficient? And how might you, a founder, sort of convince you that that was working out?
Well, I would say in the beginning, pre-seed, seed stage company, you do not benefit from people being spread around the world. That's not a benefit per se for the creation of the product. You'd be better off if they were all in the same room, I think, because you're going to get much more exchange of thoughts and information. Sales is going to be talking directly to development. Obviously, there are lots of reasons why it makes sense to have development teams in different parts of the world to take advantage of cost differences, that sort of thing. I look at it as complexity, though, and also I would judge, first and foremost, how well they're managing it, right? There are people who are able to manage that kind of complexity, in order to do that, you probably need to be very good at being a CTO or being a lead engineer, have a lot of experience in that, because it's impossible to really outsource something effectively unless you know it really well. So I would look at it and wonder, certainly if there were 30 or 50 someplace, that sounds like a lot, but just generally the seeing that there. And I would judge more on, well, are they getting the output? Are they getting the product done? Right? Does this person seem to be effectively managing those teams all over the world? So I would have a slight negative to me, but I would look more to the results and to how well that individual was able to manage that distributed team.
And just as a follow-up to that, a lot of times founders at this stage are running really fast. They feel like they need to fill seats, cross off tasks. And what you just talked about, the people working in the same room, is culture to some extent. Folks aren't necessarily intentional about building that. How would you coach founders to be more intentional about thinking about culture when, you have a million things to do on your to-do list, and maybe that's not sort of top of them?
Yeah. I mean, I think that at the seed stage, pre-seed, so much of what I'm doing as an investor is investing in people. So a lot of times you kind of either have an eye toward culture and building culture, right, as a part of what it's in your DNA, and that's what you're doing, or you don't have as much of it. So at the margin, there is some coachability there and things to do, but I certainly look for founders that are thinking about that and are thinking about how the culture that they're building, even if it's less in words and more in actions of what they're doing. Yeah, the context in which it would come up would be, all right, you're thinking about hiring that salesperson. They're not going to be resident in the office. Do you understand the challenges that's perhaps create for the loops that you're trying to bring information back from sales back into product and into dev? And so it would often come up in the context of individual hiring decisions about a person or thing. Also, just if you're trying to build a company that says it's hard, it's very hard, and if there isn't an element of culture and in there that's helping people feel like they're part of a collective, that there's a purpose behind what they're doing, that they're all working forward a similar set of goals and a vision, it's really difficult to build something well. And I think that having that focus is just super important. And I encourage founders to take the time to do that, despite the fact that there's always 150 things that need to get done.
I'm going to turn this over to you to talk about the intentionality around building early. When I was early into Pedal, I had an advantage in knowing that, from what I could tell, Pedal seemed like a pretty good place to work, because I made an early employer referral. I had and someone I check in and I say, "You still liking it?" And sometimes as an investor, I don't always know what's going on at a company. And given that you've built companies before, how do you now coach founders to think about this culture side?
Yeah, in my mind, a remote versus in office, I think I totally agree. I think being in office or at least really co-located is so important. And when I think about culture, I think about...
Does that have to be every day?
No, not necessarily every day. I think the point of culture is, there's probably many answers to this, but it's to create urgency and like really shared mission. And I think it's really difficult to do that when someone's like halfway across the world, or even like 2 states away, or even 1 state away, or 2 cities away. You do that like for as many mixed feelings as I have on like Y Combinator, I still appreciate that they force their founders in every batch to live in an apartment together in the dog patch and just like work all the time. And like, it's a brutal few months where you're working 68, 80 hours a week. But at the end of it, like, I think you come out so much stronger, and they create this amazing sense of urgency that is just difficult to replicate unless you're a founder. And even when you're a founder, it's sometimes hard. Like I've talked to a few second-time founders who've done YC, and they're like, I've never felt this much pressure. And I wish there was like a easier way to do that remotely, but I just haven't really seen that be done.
Erik and then Tessa, then we'll do a little lightning round to wrap up. Let's talk about, I'm coming to pitch GV. I say I need, I don't know, $50 million. That's reasonable, right? I'm modeling out my team plan. What do you want to see from a founder that shows I've really actually thought this through and not just ask Claude or Gemini to do this work?
Is that such a bad thing if they ask Claude or Gemini? I don't know.
Somebody has thought this.
Yeah, someone has thought it through. Look, I think, again, there's no template or number of people or anything else that we're looking for at the A. I think what we're looking for is something, reasonable for the scale of the business, and maybe even zooming out from that there's just a system for learning. They are maximizing learning about the category they're in or their customers or whatever else, and there's an adaptability. How does that translate to capital? Now I think it's actually a little more complicated because maybe there is a big AI, maybe there's a big cost that's not humans. You've kind of had the last, 20 years of startups. It's really been the human capital costs dominate that spending plan between financing rounds. And now it's maybe a bit more complex. So I think it's like when we're looking at the budget, we just want to make sure that we can pressure test different things changing, because we all know that in a startup, if you can forecast, the 5-year forecast is a total joke. The 1-year forecast is like 50% a joke. And then maybe 3 months, we sort of know what's going on. So I think it's more that there's like a reasonableness to it, and there's an approach to, understanding the inputs and outputs. But I would say, just to be totally transparent, like, it's not something we're going to spend a ton of time on, right? If it's totally unreasonable, I think that we're going to go and dig in. But we just want to make sure that the founder understands the kind of inputs and outputs that they need to sort of scale up to that next phase.
So Tessa, when you're talking to founders about their plans, what's your way of figuring out whether they've really sort of thought things through?
Yeah.
And actually, if I can just add on.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the people cost beyond salaries is something that a lot of founders don't actually quite budget in, and sometimes they get wrong. And so is there anything there that they should be thinking of as well?
Well, I think fundamentally, founders don't receive investment because they're like excellent people managers or HR people, but then you have this task put upon you because you suddenly need to employ and motivate a whole team of people to like get you to the next level and get you to the next check and funding round milestone. So this is where like infrastructure is super important to create stability and also just reliability. And you can kind of automate away a lot of the things you just simply don't need to be an expert in. And like, there's no good reason to waste your time becoming an expert in it. So I think that is one thoughtful way that founders can, take the pressure off themselves on top of all the other things they're already being asked all the time. And then I would say another like responsible way people tend to think about headcount is like you have a near-term and long-term vision. So what goes well if this next round goes well, and then what goes well if everything really goes well. And then that includes obviously progression plans for your employees that you really have invested time in already. And as well as obviously thoughtful plans around equity and richness of compensation. So I would say there's a lot of elements that goes into it, but it's about the human compassionate piece of this, and that you really are asking someone to take an amazing risk with you on this journey. And you want to, the best founders I think are careful about that.
Thank you. I really appreciate everybody's time, Carol, and your thoughts. So, thank you very much. So